Welcome, 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 Liberty lovers. This is Matthew Struck, and this is Why Libertarian, coming at you every Tuesday at 5 o'clock Eastern live. Before we get into our guest for today, if you're new or even if you're returning, watching live or watching the recorded version of this episode, please make sure to throw it a like, comment, subscribe, share. We are taking live comments and questions. If you have anything you would like to share or ask of our guest or myself. That being said, our guest for today, I am extremely honored to have from the beautiful state of California. We have the Los Angeles County Libertarian Party Chair, Angela McArdle. How's it going, Angela?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Awesome. So I'm really happy that you got to come on. One of my first episodes was with Sean Osborne. I don't know if you know that. Sean is a big fan of yours. He was really proud of what you're doing out there in LA County. But I really wanted to get you on to talk about kind of like the state of things, post the election, right? So I really want to start with just really quickly. You participated in a Soho Forum debate, right?
Yeah.
And that was essentially a three-way debate. And the crux was what? Who, like, why the various parties should vote for Jo Jorgensen? Was that kind of the basis of it?
It was who should libertarians vote for?
Okay.
Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or Jo Jorgensen. Those were the three options.
Okay. And I think at the conclusion of that, you came out victorious. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. We went from about 30% support to close to 70% support. So I doubled JoJo's support in that debate.
Yes. That's awesome. That's awesome. So who was kind of the audience? I mean, was it all card-carrying members of the Libertarian Party, or was it, just folks that kind of self-identify as libertarian? How did that work?
Well, Soho Forum debates consist a lot of Reason crowd. There's the Reason libertarians, there's the Cato libertarians, there's the LP libertarians, and then there's I call them Twitter libertarians. It's all these different groups, right? So a lot of Soho Forum libertarians, but also a lot of Tom Woods, Gene Epstein libertarians too. A little bit more Twitter sphere, I guess. We had a good mix, and then had some LP supporters, but I think it was mostly representative of the libertarian community outside of the party.
I mean, were a lot of them like undecided at the beginning, or did you have to basically flip them in terms of who are they voting for first, and then who they ended up eventually choosing to, put their support behind at the end?
A lot of them were undecided. I did have to flip some votes. I had to flip some Trump votes.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me. Yeah, I would say that this election more than last, that seemed to be more the common theme, right? Like there seemed to be more of a crossover, or at least maybe that's just kind of the pond that I'm in, but there seemed to be more of a crossover with folks that were making that decision between Joe or Trump. And less so like any of the, libertarians or libertarian leaning people that were voting for Biden. I don't think they were undecided. I think they were pretty much like anti-Trump. I'm voting for Biden right from the get-go. Did you get that impression?
Oh, yeah. And the guy who argued in favor of Joe Biden, perfectly nice guy, but he had sort of this, Donald Trump is terrible, so we have to vote against him, and Joe Biden will be less bad. And there were several people who supported, the same position, but his vote total actually went down at the end of the debate. He didn't make a compelling debate. It just wasn't a strong argument.
Yeah.
Which I think is real, right?
I think that's exactly the way the election played out. I don't think anyone made a strong argument for Biden. I don't think that happened pretty much anywhere. I mean, maybe I might be missing, one or two small little items, but so yeah, I think that's funny. So that's good. You touched on something really important. Okay. It is this, like, I wouldn't necessarily call it a fracturing, but I find it funny that a lot of libertarians will rail against this kind of like, identity politics or intersectionality kind of conversation, but then they're really quick to kind of like tribalize everyone, right? Like they're really quick to kind of build partitions. What do you think that comes from? Is it just because we get a lot of former Democrats and former Republicans that are just kind of doing the same old that they did before they got here, or is there some other dynamic?
Well, I think people are. I think there are a few things going on. One, people are prone to tribalism, so you're going to form little groups within your group. Okay, we do that with friends and with at work and organizations outside of the party. Two, the party has been sort of fractured. Maybe not. I don't even want to speak about the party. The liberty movement has been sort of fractured since the Ron Paul revolution, the last iteration of his presidential campaign. That movement sort of gained momentum, but then you didn't see anything else come up afterwards and replace it. So people became a little bit disillusioned, people who weren't as fervently passionate, for Ron Paul as the others. And they thought, well, we need someone else. We're desperate to find someone else. And they couldn't find someone else. So they're searching for something else. They're not really oriented towards anything. So they'll latch on to identity politics, or let's try this tactic, or let's try that, instead of pushing for liberty. And then you do find, the Republicans and Democrats who've joined, and they're like, well, we just need to make it like the other party, and then we'll be successful.
Yeah. I'm right on board with that. I see eye to eye with that. I'm a big believer in a lot of like the different groups that I'm a part of. I'm a big believer in, if you just build the culture, like those people will emerge, right? Like you don't need like to create like or to relate back to a religious kind of, you don't need some kind of like guru, right? To follow. Okay. And what's funny is a lot of the tribes do kind of piece off into these kind of like, well, I'm a Friedman libertarian, and I'm a, whatever, if it's Mises, or if it's, Murray Rothbard, like they all kind of like come to libertarian from those different places. And it's almost like they're searching for that kind of, what's the word for it? Kind of like in like Indian and Buddhist culture, where, they want, they want that person who's basically at the front of the shrine or whatever that they worship at to be this person that they kind of exalt. I'm actually more of a bottom up person. I think if you build that culture, those people will rise to the top, So let me ask a follow-on question. So a lot of people will make very pointed attacks at the Mises Caucus people. Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think that comes from?
Well, I actually think it's a good sign, because what we've done, the Mises Caucus has done something that the other caucuses and groups within the organization of the Libertarian Party have not done very well. And that is that we have taken the feedback from the libertarians outside of the party. We've taken it to heart. We've listened to it. And a good chunk of it, we're enacting. We're like, you're right. You've labeled some criticisms at the party. We're not good at reaching out to other libertarians. We shouldn't be shit-talking the other people who help grow the liberty movement. We shouldn't be having this like sniping at people outside of the party. You're not a real libertarian because you didn't join. Oh, you're not allowed to like anyone who does anything freedom-oriented if they haven't been an LP member. You're right. A lot of this stuff is ridiculous, and it's not actually promoting liberty, and it's not growing our party. But there are people within the party who think that is just terrible. We need to be the purest of the purest, shining white liberty snow. And it doesn't reflect reality. It doesn't produce any real results. And it doesn't get us closer to seeing liberty achieved in our lifetime, because we've become so closed off in this little social clique. And by the way, a lot of the people in this little social clique, they're not liberty purists. They're just purists about being a card carrier.
Right.
I think it's done a lot of damage, and I think that it's not helping us grow. But the Mises Caucus has listened to all of that and said, we don't want to play identity politics. We don't want to chase the left. We don't want to chase the right. We just want to grow the party. And so people are like, oh, we can't stand that you're doing that. It's just not right.
Yeah. It's this like, I don't know if it's a catch-22 or if it's one of these things where it's like, you don't want to build a party of conformists, but at the same time you need to build the party. So it's like, all right, well, what do? We can't exactly like clone a bunch of people, because we don't want that, right? But we do want a lot of people that share those core beliefs, right? So how do you do that and kind of, build kind of the infrastructure to be able to, go up against, these two kind of behemoths that we're fighting against? It is kind of like a really tough, like rock and a hard place kind of proposition. What's funny is a lot of the people will be like, well, the Mises people are like they're anti-LGBTQ, right? Or they'll even throw around like the racist stuff, which is really interesting because it's always like, it seems like very kind of like, Democrat talking points or progressive Democrat talking points that they're throwing out there. Which I think just kind of speaks to maybe a breakdown in the messaging about what the principles are and how those translate into the different positions. Because me personally, I have not seen anything out of the Mises Caucus that would lead me to believe that. I've seen very consistent messaging about, well, we're not for certain types of programs or overreach and overregulation because we feel like, liberty and freedom will win out for whatever group you're talking about, regardless of, sexual orientation or gender or race or what have you. I really wonder what that comes from. I think is it really just an internal power struggle kind of thing? Or do you think there is legitimately, I don't know, maybe a fear? Is there a fear that one group is really kind of gaining momentum within the party?
Well, we are gaining momentum within the party. We're 40% of the delegation at this point. That's insane. We've existed now for just a little over 3 years. Before the convention, it hadn't even been 3 years that we were formally even a Facebook group. We are a federal PAC now. But let's see. So is it a fear? We're growing. And there is a fear that we're going to, change the party. And we've been really unapologetic about that. And that shocks people and it offends them. Why would you say that? And I think, well, why would you not, if that's your aim and objective? Why would you hide your intentions? I want to be forthright. I want to be very upfront with people. Yes, I want to change the party. I want to change it radically. I want it to be oriented towards libertarianism instead of chasing mainstream culture. Instead of constantly mirroring whatever the culture is, I would like us to create our own culture. And we kind of barely do it, but then we shoot ourselves in the foot by trying to pander to the left, especially on social issues when we don't need to do that because we're not bigots. So we don't have to pretend like we're apologizing for someone's bigotry. Whose bigotry? We've got it in our platform that we support, gay marriage. We were the first party to do that. Nonsense. Right. We don't have to worry about that. And then we pay a lot of lip service to Trump, like kind of defending him and kind of like, oh, well, fiscal policy, at least we tried this, we tried that. His fiscal policy has been crap. Yep. It's okay to say that. We're not offending conservatives when we say that. They agree. That's why they're interested in our party, and that's a good thing. We don't necessarily, one thing that the Mises Caucus does not want to do is we don't want to bring in Republicans and have a Republican takeover. But you have to expose people to liberty in order to convince them, right? So we've got this big Facebook group and plenty of conservatives and people who are independent. They lurk in the group. They make comments. Are they card-carrying Mises members? No. Mm-hmm. Are they getting, delegate status to convention? Of course not. Right. But, it's a bit of a double standard because it's okay for people who are far left to lurk in other libertarian, social media groups. They don't get outed or, crucified for having really far left people who want to talk about Medicare for all. So I think we need to just say, hey, you know what? It's okay to have people of any political orientation hanging around on your social media group and getting influenced by you. It's not a scary entryist takeover. We're doing what we're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm right on board with that. I think maybe the missteps that have happened in the recent past have really been wanting to open the message of liberty to a broader audience, okay, and kind of reach them on their own ground. But the problem is you can't compromise the principle to do it, right? Like you can't change the policy position. You have to change how you explain the policy position,
Right.
I think that's the big difference. Like at the end of the day, most libertarians get typecast as these very cold, unagreeable, theoretical type people whose policies would never work in practice. And they completely discount the fact that the country was essentially founded on those policies, right? But the one thing that we miss the boat on is a lot of us are so desperate, almost like for acceptance by other people, by the larger circle, that sometimes we, and even if it's just a little bit, we kind of like compromise or flinch on the principle. And you want to be like, you know what? We don't need to be everyone's friend. Like we
Right.
would rather be respected than loved, right?
Right.
And I think that's a big hitching point. I mean, like you were obviously in Jorgensen's like corner to fight for her, right? I mean, hell, you debated for her, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, I mean, there might have been a couple of things in there that I know were maybe questionable in terms of the messaging that came out of her campaign, right? I mean, like a lot of it centers around Black Lives Matter.
Totally.
And I think that was just a misstep of, I think one thing that a lot of people have been openly vocal about, and maybe you have been too, is the messaging that comes from the party really needs to get away from this kind of like edgy, pithy, like making jokes and cracking comments and stuff. Like, let us do that, right? But let the principles be that constant that's coming from the party messaging. Like, even if we're not going to be top down, just every single time you put something out there into whatever media it is, just make sure it's consistent with the principles. I mean, would you agree with that?
I think so. We can message to people on the left without adopting their language.
Yes.
I don't think that using someone else's hashtag is offensive. But we all know that when Joe said it's not enough to be passively not racist, we must be actively anti-racist, it angered people because they thought and whether or not she did mean these things is beside the point. I know she doesn't support cultural Marxism or the Marxism in any way.
Right.
But people thought you just adopted, like Marxist critical race theory language. Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
There was no need to do it because we can say end qualified immunity and no knock raids, end the drug war, the origins of gun control or race.
Yeah.
We can say all of these things that message and signal to the left, and we can get in conversations with them and go back and forth on social media with BLM leaders and people who lead sort of like resistance movements within the left. We can do that in a sincere way where we don't confuse anyone about what we stand for.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm completely in agreement with that. I think the adoption of the language was an attempt to, bridge that gap.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe it was looked at as the quickest way to capitalize on that opportunity. And we have to get away from thinking about that. Like, we have to get away from thinking that there's just going to be some viral, individual candidate. There's going to be some viral meme or something like that all of a sudden makes libertarianism mainstream. Like, it's not going to happen. We have to grind it out, like vote by vote. We have to grind it out. And if we try and take shortcuts like that, I think we learned a lesson. Like, if you try and take it, not necessarily it's a shortcut, but if you try and take something that is, you think is going to be a much quicker route to success, a lot of times it's gonna hinder you. I see the things that Spike did, and I think Spike did a better job of really kind of, keeping one foot on both sides of that, right? And that was tough. I mean, what's your thought on that? That's a really tough needle to thread with what we went through and what we're continuing to go through on that issue, right?
I think that his messaging was better than Joe's. There was a more left-leaning focus than I would do personally. Mm-hmm. I think if we had someone at the top who was just really honing in on messaging and doing a great job, it would have been a really good compliment. Yeah. And I don't find that anything that I know of, the Spike said, was compromising on principle. The issue where I think it could have used improvement is that it didn't amplify our voice. it seemed that he went out and he probably spoke very sincerely at every single place he attended. I know that he did speak out a little bit against the lockdowns from what I saw.
Yep.
And I'm really happy for any votes that he gathered, but it didn't get us, additional media attention, and it doesn't, it certainly didn't get us in touch actively with the people at the top of the BLM organization.
Right.
There were certainly little groups, because they're decentralized, kind of like the LP. There were certainly little groups that said, hey, we're going to vote libertarian. I think that's cool, but I try to think about marketing and messaging sort of like bowling pins. You want to hit the top pin, and then those can kind of hit the pins behind them, and you sort of prioritize, your messaging and tailor other messaging to smaller groups. But what you do at the top, I think is the most important thing with your messaging. And I didn't really see that. I didn't see unapologetic libertarianism at the top of either campaign. I saw a lot of responding to issues.
Yeah. So let's dig into that. I love that phrase, unapologetic libertarianism, because I have just recently kind of like started to interact with Shane Hazel in Georgia. And Shane does not pull punches. He is not back down from a fight. He is not afraid to kind of speak what's on his mind. So I think he is kind of the embodiment of unapologetic libertarianism, right? And that scares people, or they're afraid. I think it's going to alienate people, but I actually look at it as something completely different. I think it inspires people, right? Like it lights a fire. And I think that that's something that you alluded to, right? Where Ron Paul left the political scene, and it created a libertarian vacuum that was not filled by someone who had the same kind of like, just inspirational power behind him. I mean, do you see more of those people rising to the forefront now? I mean, obviously Shane's an easy example of it, because he's right in the midst of, 2 Senate races that control the balance of power in the legislature. But I mean, do you see other examples of that rising to the top other than just, kind of that one obvious personality?
I mean, from elections or in general?
Just in general. I mean, just in terms of, people that are either within the Libertarian Party or just within the liberty movement. To take a broader approach to it.
Well, we've got Tom Woods, Dave Smith, Scott Horton. We've got a ton of people who are thought leaders in the movement. Gene Epstein, he's an older guy who runs the Soho Forum, but man, Ron Paul was an older guy. Some of the stuff he says is just really intense and really on point. We've got a lot of great people. Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center, even though he's not a card-carrying libertarian, he is absolutely someone who comes and speaks at our conventions and helps us mold and form opinions about nullification and, fighting against the state. By the way, a lot of those guys actually came from the left, which is kind of interesting. I think we've got a lot of great voices. I think that, the party is or the movement is still fractured. And so we're sort of shuffling right now. Who do we want to get behind? Do we want to get behind anyone? It's undecided.
Yeah. Culturally, that's also an interesting point is, until we can start winning these larger elections, and we can talk about tactics if you want, but until we can start winning these kind of, higher level seats, whether it be state level or, even federal level seats, those things are going to be the most important things that we're doing, right? Spoiling elections, being activists, getting policy that at least sees its day on the dais and gets discussed, right? As kind of not necessarily being the fly in the ointment, but being the truth serum, right? That's supposed to be injected into this process. The activities of this, like that also goes with that unapologetic libertarianness, right? Like if you're going to be the spoiler, let's stop saying we're sorry, or let's stop saying, oh, we draw equally from both sides. If we're the spoiler and all the Trumpsters want to come after us and be like, well, you cost us having like a blah, 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 Democrat president, be like, well, next time be more libertarian and we'll vote for you. Right. Like, I think that is a big dynamic. No?
Yeah, I think so. I think we need to inject ourselves into conversations in a way that we haven't been doing, because we're and I understand the political landscape is left, right, but there's there's left and there's right, and then there's the media, and there's how we get approached. And we can't control necessarily when someone approaches us, although I think we can start to change that if we'll change our behavior. But we can control how we interact with each other. And so when people come to you, okay, this is something that really not enraged me. It made me really mad. There was a Newsweek article recently that said, people want a third party choice. All demographics, people really want a third party choice. Why don't they get that? Or why don't we see it happen? And they interviewed the national chair, Joe Bishop Hinchman, who is a nice person, and I am not attacking when I say this. And he gave an answer that he said, it's because there's ballot access laws that keep us off the debate stage, and the presidential debate commission, that keeps us off the debate stage, and there's ballot access laws that keep us off the ballot. Yep. Okay, that's true. What I would have said is, wow, Newsweek, thanks for asking me, and paying a little bit of lip service to me for, a handful of times in the 50 years that we've been a party and you've been around. I don't know. Why doesn't mainstream media pay any attention to us? Like, you have the gall to ask me? Like, you you're the mouthpiece of these institutions, and you want to put that in I would have gone off. Yeah. I think that we need to stop responding like, Pavlov's dogs when these people ring a bell and we salivate. We need to flip the board. Yeah. And it's okay that we can do that. People are worried about respectability politics. We got Donald Trump, in 2016. We've got people in the progressive caucus saying F you to the president. We don't have to worry so much about, making sure our tie is straight before we go on to speak to these institutions.
Yeah. If I had one, and I wasn't on the inside, so I wasn't a part of her campaign, so I don't know what the strategizing looked like. Okay. But so if I had to give one critique to Joe and every libertarian presidential candidate that comes after, okay, that dynamic is, first of all, a lot of us will turn around and say, okay, well, all of these groups in this country need to stop acting like victims. Okay. Well, we have to do it first ourselves. Stop acting like a victim. Yes, there are two Goliaths that we're fighting against. We got to stop bitching and complaining about it and find a way around it. Whatever we have to do, basically fight for every single inch, right? The second thing I would say is, yes, there's a media bias. And when we get that media exposure, like you said, we have to get as much mileage out of it as possible. So Absolutely. What I noticed was when Joe would get on, a more mainstream, I'm not talking about Reason. Reason was always going to give her a long period of time to kind of really dig in. Stossel gave her a long period of time to dig in. I'm talking about Rubin. I'm talking about who's the guy from the Daily Wire? The interview that she did with
Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, with Ben Shapiro, right? She got 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Okay. If you're going to get 4 or 5 minutes to lay out an entire presidential campaign, you're better lighting the ground on fire than you are trying to appeal prim and proper. Okay. Yeah. That's the only argument. And I don't think that Joe doesn't have it in her. I know she has that fire within her. Just being a woman in politics, you have to have that fire inside of you. Right. But I think that's the one argument that I would make is you don't want to come off as crazy, but at the same time, milquetoast is not where it's at. That's not how you gain attention.
Right. It's not. And people also don't understand that when you're on film, you're on camera, you're going to look a little dull. That's just how it is. And you need to be a little more animated because it doesn't translate quite the same. You need to be more animated, and then you kind of come across as more normal energy. So if you go on low energy, well, good grief, people are just turning you off. Yep. We have this fear of alienating normal people, but we don't need to be ordinary to appeal to ordinary people. We need to be extraordinary to inspire normal people, and certainly to at least get their attention. Yeah. And, we haven't seen that happen in the last 2 campaigns, the last maybe 3 campaigns. We see this, libertarians are the reasonable people. They're the adult in the room. Yeah. Well, Yeah, okay, it's possible that, people don't all want an adult in the room. We elected Donald Trump in 2016 as
Yeah.
a country. Like, read the room. Read the
Yeah.
room. People, whether you like it or not, let's just take our own desires and just compartmentalize them, set them over here, we'll pick them up later. Whether you like it or not, people they're sick of like the same old messaging crap. Joe Biden won on a hashtag of settle for Biden. Donald Trump won because he really did flip the board. He was like, I'm not going to play by your rules. He funded his own campaign mostly.
Mhm.
He took less Wall Street money than any other candidate recently, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
And he didn't even have support from his own party initially, but people liked how bombastic and brash and unapologetic and, to some extent, maybe truthful he was. And they thought, well, policy be damned, experience be damned. I'm going to vote for the crazy guy because at least he's telling it like it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And you know
tell it.
what? I think the truth lies in there, obviously not going like full Trump. Like, I don't think
Right.
anyone should ever go full Trump again. Okay. But I think that control, what would I call it? Like controlled aggression. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what Ron Paul was really good at. He was matter of fact, he was teaching class for like 75% of the time. And then strategically, he would pick 25% of the time where, the hair would stand up on the back of his neck and he would call someone out for being hollow or false or completely wrong in their thinking. And I think we have to embody that more. Like there needs to be an element of passion in what's going forward. I didn't get a lot of passion from Joe. I know it's there. I don't know if it's just kind of like her background or kind of like, who she is, but I didn't get a sense of that, that fire. Like I really didn't. Now let me transition to in that vein, like in terms of finding that fire and those things that we can really key in on and kind of like get behind and really kind of push. COVID, all right? Lockdowns and COVID. What would you say is the messaging that needs to come out of this situation and be happening right now for anyone who aspires to run for a political position as a libertarian, or anyone who wants to just kind of be involved in the political process within the libertarian movement in the future? What do you think is the messaging that needs to come out of this cluster that we're in the middle of right now?
Well, I think this needs to be at the very forefront of all messaging. I don't see it any other way. This needs to be at the forefront. It's the biggest infringement on our liberties that I've seen in my lifetime, at least since the Vietnam draft. It could be worse than that, not to step on any veteran toes, but it could be worse than that. It could be, the worst thing that we've seen in 100 plus years. And it needs to be front and center. We need to remind people that the Libertarian Party supports the movement of free peoples. We support the right to assembly. We don't ever support the government locking you down for any reason. And on the subject of mandatory vaccinations and mask mandates and medical records and things like that are all tied to a government order and a government response to this pandemic, we need to say we represent the interest of people who believe in a right to privacy. And the Bill of Rights guarantees you, the right to, protect yourself from unreasonable searches. And so we do not support mandatory vaccinations. We don't buy that it's for the greater good. It furthers evil the more we erode our liberties. That's got to be at the forefront. One of the things that's been so disappointing about the National Party, and there have been a lot of similarities between, Joe's campaign and the National Party, but I do want to make the distinction. They are different organizations, but occasionally when they speak about the lockdowns, and they have not done it nearly as much as they should, but occasionally when they do, they sort of temper it with this, but it's good to wear a mask, or everyone should have, choose to wear a mask if you want. We don't need to hear that. We already know that. Don't do that. Don't be talking about how people should wear masks. People are not so dumb that they don't know to cover their mouth if they're coughing, to stay home if they're sick in light of all of this. We need to talk about how the government is ruining businesses and lives. That's what we need to do.
That is a very poignant thing to talk about. As far as messaging with the libertarian principles in mind, we have to get better of not getting stuck in the weeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're worried that you're going to alienate people when you talk about, say, the Bill of Rights and the lack of the government's ability to be able to mandate anything on your body or your property, okay, that needs to be the messaging. You can't worry about the people that say that you're going to kill grandma. You don't have to worry about if you want to wear a mask, you can, okay? But we don't need to get into statistics. We don't need to get into whether it works or not, whether it's fashionable. I think there was I take every opportunity I can. When I see something come out on social media from the National Party, if it says X, Y, and Z, and there's some tongue-in-cheek comment or there's some halfway comment, I try and nail it on them and just be like, look, those first 2 sentences were fantastic. The last 2 are complete shit. Don't even include that in the message. Just stick with the first 2. You made your point, right? Simplicity, there's a beauty in the simplicity of libertarianism. There just is. And the further you get away from that and trying to get all nuanced and everything, you lose the message. You lose it really quick, and you give so many people the phrase paralysis by analysis.
Mm-hmm.
You can't give them 97 different reasons why one thing is a good idea, right? There's got to be one thing that just cuts to the quick and says, this is the reason why it's good or bad, right? And I think that is that in and of itself. I agree with you. The campaign on Joe's side and the campaign from the national, or not the campaign, but just the messaging from the National Party, they're not the same. And sometimes they send mixed signals. You got to stop that. That's why I think the National Party needs to stick to just whatever the planks are. If this is the plank, this is the view of the plank, that's what you put out there. Don't try and be pithy. Don't try and get a laugh. Don't try and make a viral splash. We don't need that out of you. Dave Smith will find a viral splash, right? We're even helped by, I don't agree with him 100% of the time, but someone like Michael Malice,
oh yeah,
he'll find you a viral splash. That's what he does. Right? The party needs to maintain that consistency of the messaging and the principle. Let the candidates be the candidates, and then let the entertainers and the activists do what they do. I think that's extremely important. I look across the way at what YAL does, what YAL does, right? And what they do really well is that simplicity of messaging. Right? They share they'll even take those viral videos. They've been really good recently of, and I would love to pick your brain about this. So some of the businesses that are fighting against the lockdowns, they do a really good job of, they share what's viral, but the piece they add is the principle. It's not some kind of story or diatribe or something like that. It's just, this is the principle. These people are embodying the principle. Have you heard much about the folks from Orange County right now? I think what's the hashtag is it open safe? Is that the hashtag that's trending right now?
Safe reopen? I'm in Orange County right this second, actually.
Yeah. There's a handful of restaurants. I think it's open safe or safe reopen or something like that. And they're really fighting against Newsom's, banning of outdoor dining.
Yeah.
Right. Which is crazy.
A lot of them are not complying.
Yeah. Which I give them credit for. How many non-sunny days happen in Orange County? That's what I want to know.
Well, I think
when it's not on fire.
We've had one overcast day in the last couple of weeks. It's pretty nice. I have been doing legal work. I've been defending Basilico's restaurant in Huntington Beach. Okay. They have not shut down a single day since the stay-at-home orders were placed in March. They said, no, we're just going to have business as normal. Yeah. And Gavin Newsom sicked his regulatory thugs on them. From alcoholic beverage control, because the Orange County government, the local government, said, we're not going to enforce, we're not going after them. It's a PR nightmare. They don't really believe the nonsense anyway, that closures are, the best thing for people. So they're just letting it happen. Yep. I have been, as the LA County chair, really, really reaching out, obviously, defending them pro bono is something, but trying to really bridge the gap and invite these people to libertarianism, because most of them are just more traditionally conservative. And I really wish that messaging at national would seem a little more welcoming, because sometimes people ask, where can I look for? And I'm like, oh, I guess look at the LA County website, even though you live on the other side of the country.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say.
Well, a perfect example. I don't know if you followed. Did you hear about what happened at Attila's gym here in New Jersey?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Those guys,
$1.2 million in fines or something?
yeah, they're they're at 1.2 million in fines right now. They don't have to worry about paying for them because of how much fundraising is going on for them.
Right.
Okay. But I think Republicans are more resourceful than a lot of people give them credit for. So when everything goes down with that gym and they stay open and they get fined and then the locks get put on the doors and everything like that, they're obviously making a stand. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
To the credit of the Republican senator Mehta that was running here in New Jersey, he made their location a campaign location so that during the election, the governor couldn't shut them down because he would have been technically interfering with a public election, which is illegal, right? So that is an ingenious way that libertarians could have adopted some of these businesses and made them, campaign locations or things like that. If the Republicans could always throw more money at them. So that's always something you have to compete with. But look, small businesses, I think, are just a guarantee, or not a guarantee, but low-hanging fruit when it comes to libertarian principles.
Yeah.
Like guaranteed, because just speak about, upward mobility and whether or not regulation allows you to grow or it caps you a certain size. That speaks right to small businesses. And there were some missed opportunities in not just our messaging, but our campaigning. Let me ask you this. This is gonna sound pointed coming out of my mouth, but why are libertarians just such crappy campaigners? Like, is it just a lack of training? Is that what it is? Like a lack of know-how, or?
It's definitely a lack of training and a lack of know-how. It's a lack of resources. And I guess it falls under a lack of training. We don't know how to message. Yeah. We don't understand that saying taxation is theft every 30 seconds is not really communicating anything to anyone, except that we really don't like taxes. Why is taxation theft? Who is it hurting? How badly is it hurting them? What is it doing to the country? Not just, oh, well, it's bad, tax man, bad.
Yeah.
That's part of it. But yeah, I agree. Our campaigns are usually not very good. I'd like to say that's changing. We have some good people at National who've been helping. Cara Schultz, Apollo Pizzell. California, we had a really good win. We had a city councilwoman in Hanford, California, stomped the competition. Her name was Kalish Morrow. She didn't squeak by in a win. Like, she came in the top and everybody else was like 12 points below her. So she had a really good campaign manager. His name's Brent Olson from California. He's a vice chair. So we're getting there.
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, let me, so I pulled up your county website right here. And I think this chronicles, you said it was Kalish, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this, if anyone wants to know, if you want more information about the California Libertarian, I think this is the statewide Libertarian Party website. It's ca.lp.org. And you can go on there. I think you in California, you guys have basically the highest ranking right now. Oh, with the exception of once Marshall Burt gets installed in Wyoming, right? But right now you have Jeffrey Hewitt, who's basically the county board of supervisors.
We also have a county board of supervisors member in Imperial County, which is a rural county, but we won't have his information up on the website, I don't think, for another week or so.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And that's also something we have to fight against. So before I move on to that, to the point of like your messaging about taxation and stuff. So taxation is theft is good as like a hashtag on Twitter. Okay. Right. That's not a campaign slogan. All right. What you need is a vignette of people who have had their homes taken because they couldn't pay their property tax. Okay. You need a vignette of people that have been, incredibly fined or gone to prison because they didn't pay income tax. Like, those are the things that you need to put out there. And it seems like vulture kind of politics, but it's the truth. Like, those are legitimate people that we would help. by installing libertarian principles into, the rule of law and government, right? So that being said, the headway that we face, or the headwinds that we face in terms of getting libertarians elected, I think are I think we do a really poor job of for lack of a better analogy, circling the wagons. Okay, if that makes any sense, right? So, for instance, we knew that Ricky Dale Harrington and Donald Rainwater were making really big inroads in their races.
Yeah.
I didn't really see, and maybe it's just because I'm on the outside, but I didn't really see very many calls for, like, say, national phone banking or calls for volunteers to come door knock for those two campaigns to try and, like, juice it. Did anything like that really happen on the national level?
Well, I know that the National Party said they helped. Generally, campaigns like that are run by the state parties. I mean, they're run by the candidate, but most of the help comes from the state party. So I don't know, I don't want to hate on national too much when I'm not sure, but
Sure.
From what I saw, there was not a lot of help from national. There was a little bit of help.
Okay.
And, and I have some thoughts on that too. So people don't have faith in national's messaging. And so when they don't have faith in national's messaging, they don't like the messaging, then they don't pay attention to the national party. And then if the national party does have resources available for candidates, and they're limited resources, but they do exist, you're not going to reach out to them because you're like, well, what can they do for me? They can't even like get a tweet right on the internet. I don't want you near my campaign.
Yeah.
We got to fix that, so that we can actually utilize the resources that national does have.
Yeah. Where do you stand on, so Nick gets a lot of flack for, and I know I've heard you be critical of him in the past. His thought process is like, let's just get a libertarian in every single race that we possibly can, because then you get like name recognition for the party. I'm not sure I necessarily think that moves the bar all that much. I think it might kind of like help at the margins and introduce people to like just seeing the name of the party. But that being said, like I'm a big believer in like, yeah, let's do that. But let's not spread ourselves thin trying to do that. Let's like hyper concentrate our efforts in a couple of like winnable races to get some kind of proof of concept going. Where are you kind of like on that spectrum? Do you think there is some leverage that we gain or some notoriety by having a ton of libertarians run in every single race?
No, I don't like it. We should definitely have people run. And if we're like, oh, well, we don't have the resources to run a real campaign, so we're not going to run anyone, run a campaign. But trying to run someone in every single race, in every county, every district, it's a disaster. Because then we're spread so thin that you can't get enough volunteers, you can't get someone to help you door knock, even to do your graphic design and your web design, because everybody is already just consumed with every other campaign. And then you end up seeing across the nation a bunch of campaigns that have 1% to 3% voter, votes, and they've done almost, I don't want to say they've done almost nothing. The candidates work really hard, but then they've had almost no one like help them because everybody was running their own campaign or someone else's. You have no managers. And then candidates get burned out and disillusioned. They're mad, and then they leave the party or they just aren't active anymore. And that sucks. We're not really good at retaining candidates. That we definitely need to improve that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I completely agree with you there. We really need to do a better job of kind of doing the background work and being like, all right, in say just in California, maybe there's a handful of races that we got a legitimate shot for. Okay.
Yep.
So let's just put people in the, like, not necessarily create sacrificial lambs, but let's put some people in the other races that aren't necessarily winnable. Okay. But let's rally around those 4 or 5 that we've really identified strategically that we can make some inroads in. And again, it might not even be to win. It might be to play the spoiler, right? Because you play the spoiler and you'll get some at least statewide media coverage, if not national coverage, if it's a really important race, right? And so that alone, I think, is a strategic step that we can make in the right direction, where the answer isn't just run for every single race. Or if you are going to put someone's name on it, let's be realistic about, if you're just running to have your name on the ballot so that like your family can vote for you and stuff like that, that's fine. Let's just be realistic about it and not expend a ton of resources, trying to get you 5 more votes to double it to 10, right? Like,
Right.
let's find a candidate who's 5 votes away from being in the picture, and so I think that's definitely something that we can learn from this. On the subject of, kind of other issues nowadays that we can really kind of like pinpoint in terms of, strategically firing away at into the future. I think Biden's going to give us a ton of opportunities, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where do you stand kind of on the anti-war messaging? Have we done a good job on that? Or is that something that we still kind of need to work a little bit more on?
I think we've done the only job on that.
That's true.
So I'll give us credit for that. I guess we've done an okay job on it.
Yeah.
And I would say it's okay, but because our messaging isn't compelling and it's not inspiring and it's not interesting. Are we speaking out against war consistently? Yes. So I appreciate that. But is it anything that's going to stick in somebody's mind for very long? I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I agree with you. I think we've been consistent with it. I think it needs to get to the next level, whatever that next level is. I think there's an initiative right now that's of some high quality that's going on right now called the Defend the Guard initiative, where we're trying to, I'm a big believer in, I think you would align with this. I'm a big believer in, like, government is fed by certain things. It's fed by money. It's fed by our, complacency, where we're just essentially appeasing them and they kind of just take and take and take and we let them. So however you can shut down the supply, right, of whatever it is that runs on, that's how you're going to make a big effect. So, for instance, the Defend the Guard effort, if no one's familiar with it, if you look up the, Defend the Guard, it is basically a grassroots effort to get states to say, you know what, if there's no formal declaration of war by the legislature on the national level, we're not sending our National Guardsmen. We're not sending our sons and daughters to die for, war conflicts that are essentially there for political gain, or in a lot of cases, financial gain for certain types of companies that have supply lines that are being affected, right? If there's no formal declaration of war, we're not taking our sons and daughters away from what they're supposed to be defending, which is their state and taking care of their community. So I think there's actions that can happen like that are going to take that messaging, to that next level where we're not just being consistent. I think you've also been pretty active. I mean, being in California, you've been pretty actively outspoken about, legalization or at least decriminalization of marijuana. Where are you guys at with right now? I mean, you have recreational. Is there a next step that's coming on that?
Well, the California Mises Caucus is working on a decrim resolution and a policy proposal for Los Angeles County and then, other municipalities that are willing to adopt it. Oakland has adopted it. They've decriminalized psilocybin mushrooms. So that's sort of what we're going after next. We're going after psychedelics. If we can't get all psychedelics, I'm going to say we're just going to go after psilocybin mushrooms, and then we're going to go after the rest. And once we get psychedelics, then we're going to go after everything else. Yep. And I think that California is pretty receptive to it, especially because we've got a couple of cities that have, is it Santa Cruz or Santa Barbara? I think it might be Santa Cruz that has already decriminalized or legalized psychedelics. So we're getting there. Californians are receptive. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the good element of folks that come in, or not that there's bad elements, but I think that's one of the powerful elements that folks from the left come in to the Libertarian Party with, right? Like, and it's not just decriminalization or law enforcement reform. It's that the activism, right? I think Republicans are really bad at activism, right? Like the people that identify as more conservative, they're really bad at, running marches and stuff. They get out there, okay, but they have not, like, that's the minors compared to what like Democrats and progressives and liberals are able to bring to the table as far as that goes. I think we can learn a lot from that. And I think, what was the messaging that really got that effort home? Was there some really humanistic kind of messaging in California that kind of got the ball rolling on that?
I think it's just the culture. I
Yeah.
don't think that there was particularly a strong message that really, flipped the culture recently and got people saying, "Oh my gosh, I've been like red pilled on this. I've seen the
Yeah.
light." I think it's just that that's the way the culture has been for a while, and
Yeah.
that decriminalizing or legalizing cannabis made it really, like that really gave us a great stepping stone. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the gateway drug at work.
Well, I tried to draw an analogy, didn't really get any leverage, but I tried to draw the analogy that Milton Friedman was my gateway drug to much harder libertarian drugs that I've since gotten introduced to in the recent past. But um, I yeah, I think yeah, the left and even the people that exist in states that are very left leaning, that's a lot of what they bring to the table, and we can certainly adopt not necessarily the message, not necessarily the principles or anything like that, but the mechanics of
Yes.
getting that of that out there and kind of getting that to work. Yeah, no, I mean, those are the big I mean, you are also a personal kind of like flag carrier for that, right? Like I think you've
Absolutely.
mentioned in the past you use either CBD oil or some THC derivative product for physical. I mean, does
Yeah.
that help, like having more kind of like realistic faces of people being like, you know what, I was in pain and now I'm not in pain anymore?
It does. I mean, so I have Crohn's disease, and I've experienced, not a full recovery, but I'd say I'm like 75% better since I've had stem
Wow.
cell therapy and a couple other things. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But don't get me started on that and how the government has slowed that down.
Yeah.
But part of what I would suffer through is I would have crippling, intense intestinal spasms and internal bleeding. And they're so bad that sometimes I would be partially paralyzed in one leg. I couldn't walk. I almost look like I'm having a mild like seizure from the waist down. And if I'm able to smoke weed, then it stops that. And then I can function. I
Right.
generally, like when it was really bad, I'm working from home. And so it's not a big deal. As long as I don't have to go into the office, I could work. But the first 4 to 6 hours of my day were miserable because I
Yeah.
would wake up like this every day. And by smoking weed, or I used to just take Rick Simpson oil when it was really bad, which is
Okay.
really, really potent. That will get rid of it.
Yeah.
And instead of, when that's not legal, what do they put you on? Hardcore opiates.
Yeah.
Hardcore, and it's so bad for you too. Like the cannabis oil doesn't have side effects, but
Yeah.
opioids are so terrible for anyone with gastrointestinal problems. You should not, don't go there if you
Yeah.
got GI tract issues. I think that having people like me just say, "Hey, I work in the legal field, I'm not some crazy like drug addict. I don't even drink alcohol, but
Yeah.
I just need this like a medical, it's okay to take prescription drugs, you can take antidepressants, you can take painkillers, but I can't take a small amount of THC so that I can be normal." It really helped. It helped a lot in California to see soccer moms, picking up at the dispensary.
Yeah. The minivan pulling up
Yeah.
with all the bumper stickers on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I and I think that is also that's also important is we live in a world where we're always I think the powers that be are always looking for the next boogeyman, right? Like you can either sell hope or you can sell fear. Right?
Yes.
That's the two things, okay? Which is the irony. I mean, not to I don't want to go on that tangent, but I mean, that's basically what Obama ran off of, right?
Right.
Like he wanted to sell this upbeat kind of like message of hope, okay? And ever since it's been fear, right? The
Yeah.
Democratic messaging has been fear. The Republican messaging has been fear, right? Like China's coming for your jobs. You're all going to like, have to live in this kind of like, socialist gulag and all this other stuff, right? Which, by the way, I hate socialism too, but, it just speaks to how they sell the point, right? But you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater because if you're selling fear, you're also completely discounting the positives that come with things, right?
Right.
And so that's a perfect example where body autonomy or personal ownership is something where you can hit that messaging and say, look, there is this vast set of stories, human stories of people that have been helped by this thing that you think is the devil. Okay. So your cognitive dissonance takes a punch right there, because it's like, no, I've been told that this is a gateway drug and it ruins people's lives. And it's like, but you're like, no. This dozen stories, these vignettes of people that are living a better life now because of this thing that you think is 100% bad. It shakes people. And that needs to be part of that storytelling that we have to learn, right? Like,
Absolutely.
we can come at you with all of the statistics in the world. If you are dead set thinking that something is like evil, then you're going to continue to think that it's evil. It's not until a perfect example from California was, and I know we're running on an hour, so I want to be respectful of your time, but this was probably before both of our times were about. I think you've said you're in that kind of micro generation between Gen X and millennial, right? Like right on the edge. I'm right there too. I know better not to ask your age, but but from San Francisco, okay, you have Harvey Milk, who is, the first openly gay elected official, I think, in the country at the time, right? And part of what he said in coming up through politics was, as far as LGBTQ rights, or at the time it was just, LG rights, right? Was you have to tell the stories. You have to let these people know that you're gay. You have to let these people know what you're up against every day. You have to let people know that, they've known you forever and they love you. And now you're telling them something that they think is bad, right? But they've already known you for so long that you're obviously not bad, right? Like, you have to tell those humanizing stories. And I think that's something that we need to get better at as, libertarians.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I appreciate it. I want you to plug however people can get to know you more, or anything that you would like to turn people on to in terms of information, or, I'll throw the Mises Caucus website up here, but how can people learn more about you, or kind of like your initiatives and things that you're getting involved in?
Sure. So you can see what the LA County Party is up to if you visit lplac.us. If you run a county affiliate, or you're just interested in libertarian activism and you're not sure where to start, go to our website, copy our articles, use our photos, whatever you want to help that. And come January, I'll be a little bit more active in my national chair race. And if you want to see the updates on that, again, if you want to get my draft legislation and other anti-lockdown stuff too, then you can get that at my personal website, which is angelamcardle.com.
Let me pull that up just so everyone can see it really quickly. I want to make sure everyone knows what it looks like. Oh, you got all the candidates up there. That's cool. So yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I know that you're busy. You obviously have a lot on your plate, but I appreciate how vocal and how strong of a voice you've been for, the liberty movement, and specifically libertarians. And you're fighting in a state that obviously is extremely one-sided. So I also appreciate that you're walking the walk in a very difficult situation. And so, I have no doubt that you're principled in your approach because of that. So thank you very much. And look, we'll have to do this again sometime. Maybe I'll get you on with Shane, and we'll really throw down. And
yes, that would be great.
So, all right. Thank you again. Reminder, anyone who watches this, if you're watching on the live, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share. If you watch on the recorded version of this, please do the same. And I will be making sure to answer your comments if you do it after the fact. And if you have any specific questions for Angela, throw it in there and I will make sure to relay them so that she can get you an answer. So thank you again. Another Why Libertarian livecast in the can. And we will see you next week.